No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that this world was being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man's. Yet across the gulf of space, intellects vast and cool and unsympathetic regarded this Earth with envious eyes, and slowly and surely drew their plans against us. Thus begins the serialized novel The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, one of the earliest alien invasion stories ever written. Penned as a parable about British imperialism and growing international tensions at the turn of the century, the novel remains arguably Wells's most influential and analyzed work. Not long after World War I proved its subtext to be frighteningly prescient, Paramount Pictures purchased the movie rights from Wells, hoping to put together a film with the help of the visionary Cecil B. DeMille. Alas, no one in Hollywood could quite make it work, not even the likes of Sergei Eisenstein, Alexander Korda, and even Orson Welles, who had made the infamous radio play and wasn't interested in revisiting the material, until science fiction cinema started getting the respect it deserved in the early 1950s. It was the man perhaps most responsible for this rise in the genre's popularity, George Pal, who finally succeeded in bringing the Martians to Earth and in bringing H.G. Wells's most terrifying vision to the silver screen.
The world is under attack. Martians have descended upon the Earth with one purpose in mind: to eradicate the human race. When neither scientific brilliance nor military might can match the deadly efficiency of the invaders, mankind must face the possibility that it is doomed to extinction.
Before we go any further, if you could hit that like button, maybe we can slow the invasion long enough to make this channel thrive. If you really do like this video, please subscribe as well. Thank you in advance. With that out of the way, let's get back to the subject at hand. In July of 1951, after the success of Destination Moon but a few months prior to the release of When Worlds Collide, the producer George Pal was officially signed on to produce The War of the Worlds, with the blessing of Cecil DeMille. Though a few pre-existing scripts for the project are what had attracted Pal to it in the first place, he immediately discarded them and hired Barry Lyndon, who had just finished work on DeMille's The Greatest Show on Earth and was an avid H.G. Wells fan, to write a fresh one. Pal originally wanted the film to center on a husband searching for his wife, as in the novel, but the studio heads wanted a more fledgling romance. In early drafts, the hero, Clayton Forrester, is a test pilot, while the female lead, Sylvia Van Buren, is his fiancée. However, studio heads were still displeased, forcing Pal and Lyndon to rework the relationship once again, this time having the leads meet for the very first time in the first act, and fall in love by the end of the second. The workhorse director Byron Haskin, who'd recently done 1950's Treasure Island, was hired to direct in what would be the first of several collaborations with George Pal. Pal picked him for The War of the Worlds based on his experience with special effects.
By Jove, sir, we've got to save that boy.
To play Clayton Forrester, who was changed from a test pilot to a scientist in later drafts of the screenplay, Haskin initially considered Lee Marvin. However, Pal eventually concluded that it would be better to hire a cast of character actors and virtual unknowns so that the Martians would be the real stars of the picture. With that in mind, he and Haskin hired Gene Barry in what was only his second film appearance.
This is amazing.
After The War of the Worlds, Barry would go on to become most well known for his television roles in Bat Masterson, Burke's Law, and The Name of the Game. For his love interest Sylvia Van Buren, Anne Robinson, a horse stunt rider and member of the so-called Golden Circle of young Paramount up-and-comers, was given her first starring role. Though she hated the wig she was forced to wear, she was enthusiastic about the film and would reprise the role in various forms in 1988's Midnight Movie Massacre and 2005's The Naked Monster, as well as in the short-lived semi-sequel television show. Anne Robinson and Gene Barry also cameo at the end of Steven Spielberg's War of the Worlds. While the bulk of the cast is made up of character actors, many of them are worth noting. For example, Dr. Forrester's scientist colleague, Dr. Pryor, is played by Bob Cornthwaite, best known as the more antagonistic scientist from The Thing from Another World. The radio star Les Tremayne plays Major Man. The legendary voice actor Paul Frees, who also appears in The Thing from Another World, plays this reporter with a voice eerily similar to that of Orson Welles.
These tape recordings I'm making are for the sake of future history.
And Bill Phipps, who appears in the same year's Invaders from Mars and Catwoman on the Moon, plays one of these three unfortunate fellows. To narrate the film, Powell wanted Cecil B. DeMille, but DeMille declined, instead recommending the Shakespearean veteran Sir Cedric Hardwicke. Oh, and lastly, this bum is George Powell himself. Most of the movie was filmed on the Paramount lot, with a handful of location shots done while the Arizona National Guard was on maneuvers. A few brief scenes were ripped directly from When Worlds Collide, and the effects shots were put together using fairly large miniatures on Paramount's Stage 18. After it proved impractical to shoot the alien tripods of Welles' novel, Al Nozaki designed the ships to be like floating manta rays merged with a cobra. To make the heat ray, some very precise compositing was used to layer over a welding torch being blown by a fan. The original film was shot on 3-strip Technicolor, which perfectly concealed the many wires powering the ships and holding them aloft. However, in later years, the film was transferred to a more common Eastman color stock, which made the wires more visible. It's easy to see the wires today, but modern audiences would do well to remember that they were not so easy to see when the film was originally released. The first model of an actual alien proved to be too large and cumbersome, and Haskin nixed it a day before it was due to be filmed. As a result, the father and daughter costume designer team of Charles and Diana Gamora had to create the creature's body from scratch over the course of one sleepless night. They used chicken wire, papier-mâché, plywood, tape, and rubber tubing, and the model was still wet and half falling apart while it was being filmed. For many of the matte paintings, especially these in the film's opening, Powell once again used the artistic talents of Chesley Bonestell, who he'd worked with before on Destination Moon and When Worlds Collide. As good and as memorable as the visuals are, what really makes the movie work are the sound effects. Most of the alien sounds were accomplished using the feedback of an electric guitar and a hi-hat cymbal, and few sounds can so perfectly capture a film as these. George Powell's The War of the Worlds released in August of 1953 to critical acclaim and an estimated $2 million in theater rentals, making it the highest-grossing science fiction film of the year. Alongside nominations for editing and sound, it received an Academy Award for its special effects, though the primary recipient of the award, special effects supervisor Gordon Jennings, died of a heart attack before the movie was even released. In the years since, it has remained one of the most celebrated and well-known films in the canon of Golden Age sci-fi cinema. It usually competes with The Time Machine as the best film George Powell ever produced, and it has maintained a healthy pop culture footprint to this day. This has to be one of my all-time favorites as well, a movie that is etched into my brain after watching it over and over again as a child. Even my 12-year-old son likes it, despite the movie being almost 70 years old now. Like other alien invasion movies of the time, movies like The Thing from Another World and The Day the Earth Stood Still, The War of the Worlds focuses on how both the military and men of science deal with it. But unlike those other films, neither is portrayed in a negative light. This movie deliberately tries to show humanity at its best, cooperative and intelligent, and still have us impotent in the face of the technologically superior Martians. When it becomes apparent that nothing we can do will save us, mankind finally devolves into chaos, with the only recourse left being huddling together and praying for divine absolution. This brings us to the most controversial aspect of the movie, the heavy religious message. H.G. Wells was a determined agnostic when he wrote The War of the Worlds, and a devout atheist later in life, so at first blush, it seems a bit heretical to have the movie end on a note of faith, with church bells ringing and the narrator talking about God putting microbes on the earth in order to save us. Indeed, Powell and Haskin would put even more religious themes into their 1955 flop Conquest of Space, but let's save that discussion for another episode. The thing is, in The War of the Worlds, that line about God and microbes is ripped right out of the novel, so H.G. Wells has only himself to blame, as his story, despite a few scenes that are far harsher to religion than the film is, has the same underlying subtext, with the invasion ending just as abruptly, and with the main character miraculously finding his wife despite ridiculous odds against it. It's also worth noting that the movie isn't an endorsement of blind faith, given what happens to Pastor Collins early on in the invasion. The novel is one of the most famous examples of a deus ex machina, literally God from the machine. This is usually a bad thing when a plot is resolved through a last-minute intervention of an unexpected device, but it is central to the meaning of Wells's story, a way of highlighting mankind's utter helplessness in the face of unreasoning aggression and cruelty. Also, if I may be a bit pedantic, the twist is subtly foreshadowed a couple of times in the novel, so it isn't a perfect example of a deus ex machina. When the novel was published, H.G. Wells was foreseeing the wars to come, actual wars of the world in which nations would trample over one another using unimaginable weapons of destruction. And he was warning of the horrors that this would bring to the 20th century. George Pal's film updates the time period so that it is taking place in the aftermath of the atomic bomb in a world still recovering from the trauma of World Wars I and II, but the message is no less resonant. If anything, it's even more terrifying. And that's all for today, my fellow Earthlings. Which George Pal movie is your favorite? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you want to support what I do even more, consider joining my Patreon to get access to bonus videos, get your name in the credits, and more. My patrons get to vote on one movie I cover every single month. You can also check out my website at emcgill.com, where you'll find written reviews of plenty more sci-fi classics in both film and literature. Until next time, though, when we'll have to steal water to survive, this is the Unapologetic Geek, telling you to never be ashamed of what you love. As long as you're not hurting anybody.
What are we going to say to them?
Welcome to California.